She's letting us know. By the way, the link would not let me in, so I had to go back and use the meeting code and password, and then it let me in. So I don't know if folks may be having trouble with that link, or if it was just on my end.
Very good.
Hey, Chris.
Morning, Chris.
Good morning.
Scratch what I just said. Hi, Dave.
Morning, Dave.
Morning.
Morning, morning.
Great to see everybody.
Good to see you.
Let's see who's supposed to have about 9 people. Oh no, 4. Yeah, 9 people today, theoretically. Okay. We can start with 4. Did Chris or Dave, did either of you have problems logging in?
Not a bit.
Okay.
No,
Just
went
as-
right through.
Just as easy as ever.
Okay. Okay, well, we're going to start with 4. We have 4 topics. I don't know if we'll get to all of them today, but we'll do what we can. See, we've got Thomas. Wave your hand, Thomas, so people know who they are. Okay, Chris, Dave Clark, and myself, George Kirby, and we're representing 4 different parts of the country, I guess at this point. Anyway, first question or statement comes from Dave. And he says, ever notice that well-balanced instruction often involves keeping students off balance by using situational humor or presenting sudden happy changes in dojo activities or requesting students' creative technique variations on the spot, both before and after demonstrating some of your own or team teaching? What are some of the teaching techniques you use to maximize student interest through pacing a class well? Okay, so since Dave came up with this question, we're going to let him respond to it first, since he must have had some idea of what he was talking about.
Well, I love to be thrown on the spot.
Goes with your question.
Yeah, that's a long question. And you may have noticed that some of the answers I included in the question. Those are some of the techniques we use to pace our class. And pacing is such an important part of effective teaching. When I first started teaching, longer ago than I want to admit, I recognized too late that I was pacing things way too fast. And other teachers are guilty of pacing things really slowly, too slow to maintain a student interest. So because pacing is such an important thing, I wanted to bring this up and see what you guys might have to share so I could benefit from your knowledge and your years of experience, what you do to keep a class going and maintain student interest. I figure you guys would have some great ideas. So I love it. Darren just came on and I can see he's driving.
That's a
long drive. That's right.
Right there is commitment right there.
Haven't
Started up where I left off.
He's been driving all week.
Aaron, it reminds me of the chicken and the egg and the pig and ham. For pig, ham is total commitment. I'm impressed.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning to you.
Morning.
So, anyways, the main thrust of this question, without getting carried away, is what do you guys do that you feel paces your classes really well to maintain student interest?
Silence. Okay. Number one, a sense of humor is really important, because there are times when you may be presenting something and you realize you're looking at a blank wall. And students are just, how do you say, I don't want to say they're not there, but they're not there. They aren't following you. And sometimes what you have to do, I call it rewind, where you take the technique that you've shown, and maybe you show it from a different angle. You bring up a student who maybe has been sitting there like a bump on a log, and they become the uke. What else can you do to? It's a good question.
I have a couple of things, Sensei. I think I do a lot of little things. One of them is I like to challenge their own commitments. Everybody says that they want to be in class, they want to start class, and there's all these other things that interfere with their ability or their commitment to make a class. And that goes along with starting a class as well. But when you do get them in the class and they're on the floor and they're working out, they don't want to leave, and their enthusiasm is there and their excitement is there, and they're fully engaged and they're completely committed, but then they miss the next night. So I like to remind them about the conversations that we've had, not only individually, but in class with other class members about, I'm going to be here the next night, or I'll be here, so I always remind them, take a look to each side of you, see who's not there, what conversations did you have, give them a call, see if you can, get them back in class, let them know that they're, they may not be where they want to be, but it takes time, just those reminder of those type of things to get them back in class and to keep them engaged in class. That, you can have peaks and valleys in class. Some days you're going to feel on top of the world. Some days you're going to feel like the lowest of the low. And some days, even before coming, you're going to be like, oh, I'm not sure that I want to go. But the push to get to class is much harder than when you're in class and what you need to go through in class, and then the excitement and how you feel after the class is what makes it all worth it. So the reminder of those little things seems to work out for me.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Other things.
yeah. I found sometimes, and I'm really bad with students' names. I used to be a teacher. I'd say, by the end of the year, I will know half of you, either because you've been super fantastic or you've been at the other end of the spectrum. And I said, and I apologize, but yeah, if you can use their names, that Michael, get up here, or just something that personalizes it for them and gets them involved, really can change their perception of the class. Because once a teacher calls a student's name, the kid says, "Oh my God, he knows me. I better be here next time." And because you as an instructor, you do notice when certain students are missing. And as Dave said, and Darren has said, sometimes, if they're absent for a couple of weeks or a couple of classes, you give them a call and find out what's going on. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is Dave's issue is when you are teaching, what things can you do to draw them into you? And part of that is, which some of us are better skilled at than others, is acting. We all have to make believe we're the victim or whatever we want to be. Usually, if a student says something to me and it really gets to me, I'll like grabbed my heart and dropped down on my knees, feigning a heart attack. And they know it's a gag, but it gets the point across. And your involvement techniques, for lack of a better phrase, don't have to be verbal. Chris, can you give a death look? Give us a death look.
A death look.
You really ticked off a kid.
I try not to scare the students. You know, something I learned a long time ago, both in public speaking and teaching, is I try to talk or teach to my audience's satisfaction, not mine. Because I mean, like all of us, we all have a lot to say, you know, so you can go on forever. But you know, what happens, you know, when you watch the students and you know, whether they're doing something physically or just listening, you kind of have to be in tune with, are they still following, you know, or have you gone beyond them, or you're going too slow maybe, because we all come in with what we want to do. What do I want to teach today? So like this morning, I have a couple of classes, and I kind of know what I, you know, want to cover, but that's going to be contingent on how people are this morning too. So you can have people that normally are, you know, very attentive and work hard, that may have had an off night, you know, last night or whatever. So I adjust, you know, kind of to that, maybe because today they may not be in a position to receive all the things, you know, I have to give. So I give less. Other days, it seems like all the stars are lined up and they're picking things up fantastic, and they're, you know, very much attentive. So I give more. But I only give them what they can handle for that day. The second aspect is it's the environment. And I keep bringing this up because the expectation is that people conform to the environment, not the environment to the people. And it's not, you know, it's not for everybody, which is fine. You know, people want different things, but when they come, there needs to be a sense of ownership, right? A traditional dojo, there's a sense of ownership. You're not the audience. You're not just a participant. So I always encourage people to come early. In fact, I tell them they need to be here early, and then I give them things to do. You know, so go check the equipment. You know, check for safety things like that. So that they have a role to play in the dojo, not just show up and basically jump into class and do things. We also have like a leadership program, a Kohai program. So we take them in, you know, in that way, and just mentor them and train them. And then what happens is the other students kind of want that, you know, also, but to be kind of in that group, you know, you have to do your part a little bit better. So there's always adults and kids that may be having an off day, but in general, giving them that sense of belonging and only giving them what they can handle for that day really takes care of 99% of, to me, that particular issue. And I would venture to say that would be true in pretty much any setting that's somewhat similar. You know, it's not a unique concept to martial arts. I think it's just a universal concept. I do it at work, you know, for my regular job for business, same thing.
One thing that I found helpful, and this applies, those of you who don't know, I'm a pastor, a church, and I have for almost 40 years pastored. And what is true in preaching is true in teaching. If I can connect what I'm doing with a memorable story or a brief anecdote from someone's experience, it's amazing how engaged people get. And so in the teaching scenario for martial arts that I'm in, we use the virtues of Bushido and approach them through an implicit Judeo-Christian mindset And those regularly, those different aspects of Bushido will be peppered in with stories. There are times when I've quoted Professor Kirby, things that I heard him say, and turned that into a moment. And one other thing that we've done, and frankly, I'm surprised at how well this has worked. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but for a long time in my teaching decades, I would avoid the use of traditional weaponry, not because I didn't value it, not because I wasn't learning it myself, but I had in my mind, you've got to have a complete standalone. And now every class will take a portion of the class, and right now they're working on the Boken, and we'll break everything we're doing and we'll set up and we'll do training with the Boken or the Jo or the Tanjo or whatever it is. And I'm amazed at how quickly just that shift of what I'm doing from not doing a pure self-defense technique to grabbing a weapon and doing XYZ, it's like it increases their sponge capacity and they soak up more. So that was a serendipitous discovery, frankly. Some of you probably already knew that, but that came late for me.
That's great. You guys have already come up with a dozen items, and I got writer's cramp already. Thank you. Toss something else out just briefly. Does anybody do team teaching on a fairly regular basis? About once a month in our dojo, we have a guest sensei, and we bounce off each other through most of the class. By shifting gears from one sensei to another, the class really responds positively. They love the fresh infusion of ideas from a guest sensei. Anybody else do that? And have you got any suggestions on what's worked well when you've done team teaching?
We do a little bit of it, Dave, and it's more. My most senior students are in the class with us. It's one big group class most of the time, and they know that at any point I'm going to step off and say, "Sensei so and so, take this and do XYZ or introduce this," and so. It kind of borrows that mentality. It takes a village to raise a child. I guess it takes a group of senseis to train up one, something like that. But that has worked very well in our setting.
One of the things I've found that's part of my regular instructional format is I will, after we bow in, etc., I will give students 5 or 10 minutes just to come out, practice warm-up goes, anything they want. And that allows me sometimes to pick up on where there are problems in techniques, or there may be 2 or 3 different teams that are having the same problem. And then that usually becomes my first instructional sequence is, I notice this, I tend to look if there are problems, or students are having problems with techniques, you can't blame the student. You can only blame, I hate to say it, you can only blame the sensei. And sometimes it's something needs to be shown differently, or they may have made an assumption that isn't valid, which is why they're doing what they're doing. But I usually use that for my first 1 or 2 instructional sequences is based upon what I see walking into the class or walking onto the mat. Sometimes a student before class will ask me, Sensei, can you teach this technique or that technique? Sometimes they'll say, I'll be in the middle of teaching a technique, and sometimes the student will say, well, what if you do it this way? Or what if this happens? And you have to either deal with it or say, well, we're going to get to that next. That get to that next allows you to finish up what you were doing, and then allows them to get their 2 cents in. So that helps them be more involved. My students do know, and this is in the classroom as well as on the mat, It's easy, I could have a lesson plan set up. As a teacher, I gave up on lesson plans after my first year of teaching in the classroom because they never worked. Too many interruptions. But in any case, my students know it's easy to get me off track, and I don't mind that much as long as somehow we eventually get back to what I wanted to do. Because you have to, usually they're asking questions because they have needs and you need to meet their needs. As I forgot who said it earlier, you're not in the dojo to meet your needs as an instructor, you're there to meet their needs as a student. And that I think is it. Okay. Good morning, Ken. Your mic, is your mic on? No, you're okay.
I'm on now.
You're on now. Good.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, sorry I was late. I just been running around like a madman today.
Okay. Chris, your mic is on now. Okay. Any other thoughts on this topic or things to get students involved or warped senses of humor or unexpected things you can do with?
Well, there's something that I do at my school that the kids love, and I call it the fishbowl, where I actually have a fishbowl and I'll take everything that was in the manual from the school from white belt to black belt and put it on individual pieces of paper and put them in the fishbowl. And I would have the kids take turns picking one out, and whatever was on that paper, no matter what level they were at, that's what we did.
Okay. And that shows you're prepared.
Yes. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
It's not,
And
God, I got to look up this technique and see how it's done. So I'm
right.
to do it halfway right.
Yeah. And the other instructors were like so on board with it that we had so much fun that the kids requested it each night that I talked that we do the fishbowl, because it was just such a change from the regular format that they were used to.
Okay. That's a good idea.
I like it.
Okay. And they don't know what's going to happen either. So it's a surprise for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay. Sometimes you do have to, one of the frustrations I have is, and it was really bothering me the last year I was teaching in dojos. I seem to, how do you say, because you have more newer students and you have older students, lower rank, so to speak. It's harder for me to, how do you say, it's harder for me to deal with quote unquote upper belt techniques because sometimes the lower ranks don't have those skills. For example, what's prime example? Let's take Hane Goshi, inside sweeping hip throw, which is probably my worst technique. And I did not get that down until after I was second degree black belt. It was just an impossible technique for me until one night I got it. And Seki said, "Oh, Joji, you got it." But in any case, we have those techniques that are very frustrating to us as instructors, yet we have to teach them. And I guess the question is, how do you teach a technique to an upper belt that they need while not ignoring what lower ranks need to cover and still be teaching essentially the same technique or concept? Am I making sense?
I was writing. What was the very last statement you said?
Gee, I forgot what it was. You're
You're talking Hani Goshi.
Yeah, we're talking Goshi as an example. That's my worst case scenario for me. And how do you teach that technique to an upper belt, purple belt, fourth kyu, which they should be learning it by that time? And what do you do for a white belt or a green belt or a lower rank, so that they feel they're quote unquote starting to learn the technique?
That particular technique, what I've done successfully, because that is an unusual technique in terms of the number of steps involved. It's kind of a hip throw on steroids, is to consider doing this right-handed, where placement of my right hip. And if I'm showing the mid belts and reminding the upper belts that on this technique, if you put your right hip lining up with their belly button, that when you send your right leg out, you're in a good position for both the Hani Goshi and the Harai Goshi. And so have them put their hip in different positions in relation to their uke, and try having their hip even with the outside of their hip, have your hip even with their belly button, have your hip just to the left of their belly button, and work the technique several ways to find which way works best for them. So I give them some variations because Hani Goshi works really well for some people when they line their body up perfectly in line with their uke. And other people, when they put their right hip on the belly button of their uke, the Hani Goshi works a lot better for them. The Harai Goshi definitely works better from that position. So you take an aspect of the technique and focus on that aspect for them to experiment. And so white belt might be, they're still working on a basic hip throw, but this gives them an idea that after I get comfortable with the master of the basic hip throw, that this is a hip throw quote on steroids.
That's a great relation, Dave. I do the same thing with the lower ranking belts, to relate it to a technique that they're familiar with, and then refine it as we go along. And the example that you gave was a perfect scenario, going from a basic hip throw, Koshinagi, to Hani Goshi, to an experience level. Sensei, of course, I've seen the same thing with just about everyone having a struggle with developing their technique on Hani Goshi. It's been a challenge for a lot of people that I've seen on that particular technique. But the way that I do it is the same way that Dave had just said, was relating it to a basic technique that everybody's familiar with, and then refining their technique going into a more advanced technique such as Hani Goshi.
I suspect that what I'm doing is very similar in terms of overlap. Anytime we're teaching a Goshi and waza, I'm thinking about it in terms of what does this look like for a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced student to do. And in particular with my advanced students, many times I'll be their uke because I need to feel where they're at or not at least for a few iterations. And then my advanced students often become, this goes to that mixing in the team teaching, the ones who will work with a beginning student on that same technique, and I'll watch and offer critiques more of the advanced student, although it looks like everybody's getting an even response from me. That seems to work well, so that a beginning student has kind of the big picture of what's going on, but an advanced student has nuance. But what I preface that, I should have prefaced it by saying, we do a rotating curriculum where everybody is learning the same technique at the same time, regardless of belt level. It's just how are we evaluating their outcomes? Part of that's forced because of my time frame. So,
okay, I think Thomas, you brought up some very important things. Number one, it is critical for you as sensei to sometimes get in there and have the student execute or partially execute a technique on you so that you know by feel, and that's a key to this whole art. It's all by feel. Is by feel that they're executing the technique or that part of the technique correctly. The other important point you brought up was that it's to have an advanced student work with them who's very familiar with the technique, so that student can provide the same kind of support that you would be providing to them. Because they need, if you have 2 white belts or 2 green belts or 2 purple belts working with each other, it's a new technique. They need someone who is more experienced with the technique so that they can develop that feel for the technique or know that what they're doing is proper. So that's a really good point to bring up. So anything else on this topic?
Doing great. We're up to 20. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Well, let us know. Try them all, and let us know in 2 weeks what happened.
That's right. Yeah.
No.
Sensei, this problem, may be even more exasperated in situations like yours and mine, where since we work through the city, we get a whole batch of new people like at one time sometimes, and it disrupts kind of what you have going on. They're not walk in anytime type of thing. We take registrations 4 times a year. So it does present maybe, it takes it up a level as far as an issue to deal with. For us, I've been fortunate over the years to develop good instructors. So I have enough coming in on a daily basis where we put them into different groups, based on level. Not every class works out that way, but most of our classes do. But in general, maybe my approach is a little bit different in that we're training always for 3 things. We're training physically, so we want their bodies to get stronger and their coordination, to kick in. And then we're training them mentally so that they're able to focus on what they're doing and retain the information. And then thirdly, we're teaching concept. So, I'm a little bit more technique agnostic, if that's a correct way to say it. So I'm not too concerned about what technique is being taught. We have 5 concepts, and we're always teaching 1 or more of those concepts. And these concepts are common in everything that I found, in any type of martial arts and everything. So, if they're in different groups or if we're in one group, whatever the case is, if the concept is, to take somebody off balance, like kazushi or something like that, the technique to me is just the way to deliver the concept. It's a way to execute the concept. And so for a lower belt or somebody less trained, we may have them do a different technique to practice to deliver that same concept. Where a higher belt, we may give them a more difficult technique, but still to deliver that same concept. So everybody at the dojo is being trained on the same concept on that particular day, although they may be using different techniques. And so as they get more comfortable and better with a certain technique, we give them a more advanced technique, but what remains common is that same concept is being emphasized over and over again. And I do this just for simplification, but also I found that, when you do go into a more dynamic situation like a randori or something, or multiple opponents, you see technique kind of go out the door. especially the ones that involve more steps and more details to it, right? And so now some of that is just, you know, the inability to, you know, to be trained well, you know, well enough to execute those things. But really what it comes down to is the concept and strategy. And at that time, things are happening so quickly, especially with multiple opponents, that you really can only focus on strategy and the concept of what needs to be done to stay safe or get out of there or take, you know, apprehend them or whatever, you know, you're trying to accomplish. And the technique becomes less relevant. So the student is not thinking about what technique should I use for this, what techniques. It's too slow to go through that. All they need to focus on is strategy, and if they're grabbed or if they're being punched or kicked or if somebody's coming at them with a weapon, they just need to respond with the concept. And whatever technique manifests as a method of delivery for that concept, you know, then it is. There's no right or wrong, you know, technique. There's just right or wrong concept. Basically, if, you know, don't get touched, and if you do, you know, make sure, you know, you minimize the damage, you know, that's going to occur and get out of the way. So our 5 concepts, for example, are the use of gravity, the use of your hips, angles, the best angles to move in, and push and pull concept, and what we call 4 corners, you know, which is, you know, your shoulders and your hips to keep your arms in the middle and never let it go outside the 4 corners. So when something is not working for you, I don't go try to correct their technique. I tell them, you know, what concept are you trying to, you know, apply here, or what needs to be applied here? So if a lot of times their arms might be outside of their shoulders, so they're weak. So I tell them, okay, either move your arm or you move your body to catch up with your arm. You know, if you can't pull your arm back, let them have it, but turn your body. Now all of a sudden you're stronger, you know, and you have more leverage in the way you do things. If you're getting taken down a lot, well, maybe your gravity isn't there. So your stances, you know, need to come down when somebody's trying to take you down, to lower your center of gravity. You don't generate enough power for a takedown or a punch, then your push and pull isn't, you know, happening. So we're always emphasizing those things, and then whatever technique they choose to do, you know, then that's really, you know, up to them. Of course, we have to train them for the techniques, but once they are trained, I don't tell them use this technique or that technique. I just tell them make sure you apply that concept, and then they choose whatever they want. So I don't know if that helps, if it just confuses things more, or I'm way off base, but it works for us. So.
I have a follow-on question for you, Chris, if I might.
Yeah, sure.
So classical jiu-jitsu and 5 animal kung fu, those are the 2 main things that I teach. Mm-hmm. So as I'm listening, I'm thinking, tell me if this is right. If I keep those principles in mind, concepts, is there a tiger kung fu expression that might differ from a traditional jiu-jitsu expression in applying them as you're thinking about it?
Not to me. You know, the concept is exactly the same. You know, if that art is what I would consider like a complete art, and for me, most of the things that have survived are pretty much have everything. You know, the practitioner may not be utilizing it, but it's there, you know, if you dig into it, you know, deep enough. So if it comes to jiu-jitsu, you know, there's certain techniques and things that have a specific name to it, right? So if you're in the jiu-jitsu circle or Aikido circle, there's certain terms, you know, like Aikido has first teaching, second teaching, you know, ikkyo, nikyo, or ikajo, sankajo, depending on, you know, the style you're practicing. And all it means is first concept, second concept. It's kind of generic. The founder decided to attach a technique, a specific technique to that term. but it's universal. So I can travel anywhere in the world and somebody says, okay, let's do Ikkyo or Ikajo. I know what they're talking about. So I think it's important to maintain those names. I know Sensei Kirby has, a lot of stuff, also. So when he says it, I need to know what he's talking about as far as a technique. But that technique can be conveying one or more of the concepts, that I teach. And so my focus then is to make sure that the concept is being delivered regardless of what technique or what it's called. So in what we teach, we have multiple things. So we have Okinawan karate base that we teach. We have Aikido, we have Jiu-Jitsu, we do boxing, but I don't treat them as necessarily separate things. We have classes that emphasize, we have 3 different kinds of weapons classes, but they're all kind of doing the same thing. It doesn't matter where you start, whether you grab a bow, you grab a sword, you grab nunchucks. We're always teaching you the same concepts, so if you go to another one of our classes that's kicking, punching, or grappling, you're going to find most of the things to be common, even though, it's under a different label. So from a reference perspective to techniques, I think whatever the Kung Fu terms are, use the Kung Fu terms, whatever the Jiu-Jitsu terms are, use that. But as far as the concept, that has to be compatible, right? So if you can't make that connection between, if I'm in your Kung Fu class, I do things vastly different than I do in the Jiu-Jitsu class, then there's a disconnect. So to me, we're going 2 different ways. Okay, you're a pastor, right? So it's the same thing, you have different denominations sometimes and different interpretations, not interpretations, but different versions of the Bible, ESV and ASV, New King James. But is the teaching the same? You know what I mean? Is if the word has changed, the word may change, but doesn't mean the same thing, because once the meaning changes, then you're going in 2 different directions. It's a different Bible now. So it's the same with martial arts. It doesn't, to me, matter what you're practicing or what you want to call it. It has to be emphasizing the same things. When Sensei Kirby shows up, I do it differently. I just turn it over to the visiting instructor. And so when he comes to our dojo to teach, I give the class to him, and he may be using names, sometimes my students won't recognize. But once he shows the technique and emphasizes what he's trying to convey, my students can pick up on that because they've learned those same concepts, even though it's a different, system with a different name. And same thing, I have all sorts of different, instructors that come in, throughout the year. Well, we did, now we're starting to again, hopefully we can get to that. Doesn't matter what they're teaching, we just pick up on the concept. What do we have in common and build off of that.
Thank you.
Chris, I got a quick question follow-up, if I may. Thomas, did you have something else?
No, I said thank you for that answer. Yeah.
Chris, you mentioned your 5 concepts: gravity, hips, angles, push, pull, and 4 corners. Be interested to hear you elaborate on how you present the whole 4 corners thing. Kote Gaishi is considered a 4 corners throw because you can do a 360 and connect with your surroundings to decide how and where you want to complete the throw, if you even do choose to complete the throw. So, I mean, I look at Kote Gaishi as its other name, the 4 corners throw. Is your 4 corners concept referring to a spatial awareness? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so Kote Gaishi is the wrist throw, right? Is what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. It is a wrist throw, but it's an it's an overhead spinning wrist throw.
Okay,
the old Jiu-Jitsu manuals would call it a spinner.
Yeah, so I actually learned those in Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, So the four corner concept is shihonage, is what they refer to, and the kotegaeshi is the wrist throw. You know, the thing is all those things were designed to break things, not to actually throw somebody down. The reason they get thrown is for safety, right? So we teach them ukemi so that they can kind of throw themselves and get out of it. But if you were to do that quickly on somebody, especially untrained, is designed to break, you know, especially the wrist one. That's an easy one to do. I mean, without getting into, you know, too much detail for that one, I see a lot of times when people do it, see if I can do it in front of the camera this way here. When they do a kotegaeshi, they pull the arm out all the way to the side like this of the person. And so the way we execute that is I actually push it into the person and kind of push in with my with my elbow a little bit here, and then rotate my hips rather than kind of do a steering wheel, you know, type of thing here. You know, because this tends to slip, and some people are really strong or quick, and they can turn their body to, you know, adapt to it. So so in that way, you know, when I refer to the four corner concept, it's not so much what's happening to the other person, it's me. So if I'm doing this, I don't want my arms to go here to finish the technique because I left my shoulders. You know, so what I do is I hold it in the center and I rotate my hips. So it's the same with sword, you know, so you're building a triangle this way here. You got your shoulders and you got your arms. So that's your strongest structure. As soon as you go like this, your structure is weak, right? As soon as you go like this, your structure is weak.
Yeah.
So it's just maintaining that structure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
One of the to comment on what Chris said, you have a lot in there, Chris, and like,
Sorry, it's just me.
we may end up spending the whole day dealing with this one question that Dave brought up. But one of the things I learned eventually was you and I think you stressed it in terms of how you were executing the teinagi or kotegaeshi is you're working in a circle. And one of the things I try to correct students on is that whatever technique you're doing, you need to, you know, you're working a circle. You want your attacker to end up at your feet. Okay, because if he's at your feet, you can do anything else you need to do to him. If you throw him away, and that's how I originally learned teinagi or kotegaeshi, was this, you know, big movement, and you had to pivot your left foot back, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is you want your attacker to end up at your feet, and it took me a while to get that concept from Seki. Now, okay, Tomonagi, you may want to let the person fly off into the sunset so he can go through the bar doors or through a window like in old Westerns. But in reality, most of the time, we want to keep control of this person. So you do need to, you need to move your footwork so that you do remain balanced. And that's the key to executing any technique, I think, in any martial art, is that if you've got your balance and you can work the technique in a circle so that circle comes back to you, you're going to be okay. And that's one of the concepts I use is, you know, that you need to think as a circle. You've got this huge globe around you, and everything you do if it's going to work, has to be within that circle or globe. It doesn't matter what direction you go. You just need to have it. You need to have your footwork in the right places so that you stay balanced. Anyway, the other thing I was going to touch on, I forgot about now. It'll come back later. Okay, John or Ken, do you have anything you want to throw in here? Or? before we go on to the next topic?
Oh no, I'm just taking it all in. So no, I don't feel that there's anything I need to add to it, but thank you.
Okay. Okay. The unusual situations in the dojo, and stuff happens that you don't anticipate in the dojo. The youth instructor gets stuck. I mean, I've been stuck with a lot of stuff in you know, as a classroom teacher, as a jiu-jitsu instructor, and the first thing I have here is keeping your calm. It is really important if you have a stressful situation for you. It doesn't matter what you're feeling inside. You have to create the illusion that you are in control of the situation, which means you've got to maintain a calm voice. And as an example, I'm going to use a situation where this was from a highway patrolman many years ago. He said, if I go up to a car and I'm really nervous and I say, show me your driver's license, the guy's just going to pull away from me and I'm not going to get anywhere. So you've got to keep, and I forget who I was talking about this with a couple days ago. You've got to maintain a low, calm voice that sounds like you know what's going on and that you are in charge. And that's hard to do at times. And so there are some scenarios here that I came up with. And my question is, if you have, I'm just gonna throw it out there. And I know some of you may work through YMCAs and other agencies that have, there are certain things you are supposed to do, like don't touch the student, call for help from someone who supposedly is trained. If you have an injured student, at what point would you call a paramedic? And we can differentiate between kids and adults because there is a difference.
We had a young man in our dojo. We have a pull-up bar. We had a young man who didn't follow directions and literally fell from the pull-up bar and landed on his lower back. Probably the scariest thing that ever happened in our dojo. And I ran over to him and got him calmed down. And basically, I mean, this could be a very debilitating or permanent lower back injury, the way he fell. So I asked him to remain perfectly still, and he did. And then he started to very gradually move his feet and his arms. And I said, how does it feel? He said, well, like you think it hurts. But what we determined early on is that all he had was a bad bruise. But I was this close to calling paramedics because I was not. We have people spotting people doing pull-ups, but the spotters didn't get them. We have two people, one on each side, and so we then had spotter training after that. We hadn't had an incident since. But that was the closest we've ever come. We've never had anything else where I felt like need to call a paramedic in. It was scary for probably 2 minutes.
Okay. I've had numerous situations, and I think with an adult, I differentiate. I mean, if the adult, my criteria is it a serious injury? It's for adults and kids, and two, have they gone into shock or not? Because I've had students that have done both. If a person goes into shock, I'll automatically have someone call 911. they can come out of, they may come out of it perfectly fine. They may not, but it's not worth your risk, liability wise, to say, well, let's wait 5 minutes and see what happens. Because if a person goes into shock, their body is in trouble. If it's a sprain, if it's an adult, I'll say, okay, do you want a paramedic, or is there someone who can drive you home? Or I mean, I had one adult who sprained his right ankle and he wanted to drive home. And I said, no, you're not going to. I said, we'll get someone to drive you home, or we'll get someone to drive you to the hospital, or we can call a paramedic, but you're not going to drive home, because if they were to get into an accident, the issue is, do you have some liability here? Okay, of course they're an adult, but still, you don't want to have to deal with that. It's just for a kid, if they're going to shock, or it's a fracture, I'll call a paramedic. Sprain, I'll call the parents first. You want to, the first or second thing you do is call a parent and let them know what's going on and what you've done, and ask them what they want done. And I've never had a parent that's subjected to me calling paramedics so far. I mean, it's just, you know, they appreciate the fact that you care that much about their kid. So, and in terms of treat, I assume you know how to, you know, you've had first aid training, you know how to treat for shock, right? Can we all nod yes?
Yes, absolutely.
And don't be afraid. I mean, I learned this when I had my second heart attack. I never knew I had the first one, and that's what saved me from heart damage when I had my second heart attack. But when I was being treated for the second heart attack, before the paramedics got to me, the 911 operator asked my wife, is he sitting up? I thought you were supposed to lie the person down. And for shock, you lie the person down, raise their feet, because it gets more blood to their brain. But for heart attack, you want them sitting. So she said, put them in a sitting position. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm going through this, and that's a unique approach. But anyway, so that's just a little different. That, you know, that's assuming, you know, I was conscious and breathing. If I was not breathing, etc., then it'd be CPR time. And then you want the person lying flat. But it's just, you know, these little fine-tuning things that you don't learn until you go through the experience. I have had an administrator who wanted, in one case at the junior high, who wanted to straighten a kid's leg to see if it was actually broken. And the kid had a fractured femur and both lower bones were broken. And we ended up having an argument in the classroom in front of the kids over whether or not he was going to touch this kid. He didn't, fortunately. And the paramedics chewed him out afterwards. And then the principal chewed him out afterwards. It was not a good day for him. But in any case, many people are hesitant about calling a paramedic if a student is injured, but you have to realize your first concern is the student's safety. And that always has to be your primary concern. Even when you're teaching a technique, and, you know, to make sure they do it right. Okay, second one, upset student, parent, or observer. It helps to be polite, and you can be firm and be polite. You can ask them to leave, and I have a very shallow I will not go outside with an upset person because you don't know what's going to happen. I have a very shallow response rate. They either, you know, leave, goodbye, etc., or I have a code word that I use with my upper belts, or I'll simply do this, and they know it means call 911. I've had drunks walk into the classroom. This is a park class. They walk in and they want to, you know, see who's the strongest, you know, and all you can do is play them along, and someone else is gone and call the 911, the police show up, they take them away, life goes on. You don't want, if you have an upset person, you don't want to be confrontational with them. That's the worst thing you can do, because that's what they're looking for. So you hate to say play them along, but you play them along. Recording. Do you have parents that record video in class or take pictures? Okay. I had a grandparent who did this for weeks on end. And then finally I got a call from the city. It said one of the parents of one of the kids called up and they objected to their kid being on the video. Now, I do have in my participant release a thing that says they may be on video and they're giving permission, et cetera, because, you know, you don't want to have to deal with photo releases. If the newspaper comes in and want to take pictures, or you want to shoot a video and then put it on YouTube, stuff like that. That's a real pain. So I make it just a generic part of my participant agreement. But if someone else is shooting video, I had to ask that grandparent to not shoot video anymore of his kid, and that was the last time they were there. I don't know why. I mean, the kid was doing fine, the grandparent was fine otherwise, but you have to make sure that none of your other students object or their parents object to having their video or pictures taken of them. It's just, again, it's a matter for your own quote unquote protection. How many of you know where your emergency exits? And are they accessible?
Ours is easy. We got one way in and one way out.
That's fine.
I feel that, Chris.
Chris is doing
Yeah.
good. There's only one way in and one way out. And yeah, so that you have to, because sometimes there may be an exit sign there, and you go outside that exit, and it's amazing how much stuff there can be around that someone can, you know, trip over, fall over, or the exit is actually blocked. So it's just a matter of knowing. Years ago when I taught at the high school, we actually had a fire on campus. One of the transformers from where the power comes into the school had caught fire. Do you know where one of the exit routes was for one particular building? Was to walk right alongside that transformer. And what amazed me more was that there were teachers that were walking their kids by this. It's kind of like, you know, the blind leading the blind. And, you know, so I because of the time that I was a department chair and I had a walkie-talkie, I just said, I'm closing this exit to the building. It's going to create some congestion, but this is what's happening. And no one got on my case afterwards. Sometimes you may find that in trying to help people get to a safe situation, there's stuff in the way, or they may be walking into a more dangerous situation. And you just have to, you know, I consider it part of my martial arts awareness. You know, you just have to be aware of all this. I guess in martial arts, they call it a sixth sense, kind of being aware of what's going on around you. And you got to protect all the little ducklings, for lack of a better phrase. up here in Valencia, there's actually, it's about a quarter mile away, there's this big intersection, and there are a couple of artificial lakes. And not only are there permanent signs, you know, like for caution, that say caution, duck crossing, because the ducks do cross with their, you know, and all the traffic stops, you know, for them. But they also have, like, when you're having construction with those blinking lights, solar powered signs, they've got those up there now too, to watch, you know, watch out for ducks. It's, you know, how do you say, it's on the one hand, it's stupid, it's funny, but you know, you don't want to kill a duck.
The ironic thing about that, Sensei, is the ducks have wings. They could fly, but they decide to walk across the road.
Yes. Yeah.
Who's in charge of who? That's right.
You really like so, but anyway, okay. Last topic, or next topic. That we got through fast. It says, perhaps we could talk about hosting events in your dojo. I'm not sure what they mean by your dojo. Maybe it's your own dojo. And all that entails at an upcoming meeting. I'd like to hear some experience and ideas regarding seminars, public performances, and other activities hosted at or by a martial arts school. That's from Jonathan. Okay. My number one rule, and from experience, an adult's attention span is about 20-25 minutes. That's why you have TV commercials and sitcoms that are not more than a half hour long. If you get down to the actual show, it's maybe 20 minutes, 22 minutes. Your demo, regardless of what, it should not be more than 20 minutes long. 15, 20 minutes tops, because people are going to, they're going to start to get bored no matter how fast you move this thing. Now you can come back later and do another demo on a different aspect of your art or whatever, but I usually limit mine to 20 minutes at the most. I like to involve, yes, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just typed, I gotta run to teach
Oh, okay.
classes. Fun as always, guys. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris.
All right.
Do my best to your kids.
Will do. Take care.
What else? 20 minutes. Keep them moving. If you can involve a couple people from the audience, that always helps. You can always teach them a really simple, dirt simple technique that they can do. Don't worry about having them sign a participant release. That's going to take too much time. It will scare people away, especially if they read it. What else can I say on demonstrations? The technology has changed. If you can, wireless microphones are really inexpensive today. So get one or get two so that people can hear you, because you can't execute techniques and hold a microphone at the same time. Unless you've got three hands or something like that. So far, a wireless mic is invaluable. I used a wireless mic in my last several years in the classroom. Not because the kids were loud, but because of another medical issue I had at the time. Anyway, hosting events. And we can go back to, it was just a seminar for your students in your dojo. I don't want to say it involves maybe 3 to 4 weeks of prep time, but you can give your kids, your students 3 to 4 weeks notice, and they'll show up. Some of them will, most of them will, especially if you've got their interest going on it. And you can play it up, they'll be here. And as Chris said, if I have a guest instructor, I'll usually turn it over to the guest instructor, and they run, they run the show. Unless it's something really outlandish, such as they show up with a loaded revolver. No, we've had that happen. The other, if you're talking about inviting outside people, students, okay, we used to run Camp Budoshin and other things. You've got to get started months ahead of time. Your number one issue is securing a venue. It may be your own dojo, or you may feel you need someplace bigger. Do some shopping around. Prices vary. If you happen to be a nonprofit organization, like our dojo is a 501c3 charitable foundation, surprisingly. We usually go through the city of Santa Clarita or the local junior college, and we get a facility anywhere from half to 1/3 of what it normally costs, because we're nonprofit. So maybe you can argue your way into a nonprofit situation, because that's going to be your biggest cost, is the facility. Next one is mats. If you're going for a bigger facility, such as a gymnasium, like we did for Camp Budoshin, you need mats. And the easiest way we found to get them was to say to the sensei, we'd line up our senseis again months in advance, and they'd only be teaching a couple hours out of a whole day, or maybe an hour. But we'd say for every 2 mats, or we'd give the square footage, because some people bring in 5x10, 6x12s. Some people try and bring in the little squares, which is a futile experience when you're dealing with a gymnasium. And we usually said for every 2 4x8 mats you bring in, one of your students gets in free. And that's an incentive, that's some instructors will bring 10, 12 mats. And I'll say, 16 mats. I said, just make sure you have something on your mats that identifies them as yours. That's the other thing, because otherwise some instructors, sometimes people will walk off with the wrong mats, and that's a tough situation. You don't want to get in the middle of. But that's one way to get mats. Sometimes years ago, I did a seminar in Florida. It was the weekend after there's some huge martial arts convention, and all these suppliers had donated mats, et cetera, et cetera. And someone picked up on that, and they decided to have another martial arts seminar the following weekend at the same facility. And they had all these mats available to them for free. Unfortunately, the event bombed because not because the instructors were great, but you can't have 2 martial arts events a weekend apart in the same location and assume people are going to stick around for a week. And he didn't realize that. And I said, that was because the guy asked me afterwards, what did I do wrong? And I said, everything was beautiful, except that it was a week after another event. And nobody's saying, what are people going to do during the week in Florida? Okay. And, he realized that. But I think that because of that, I was one of the few instructors that got paid. But it literally, it literally bombed. There were great instructors, a lot of mats. His event went on for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, lots of advertising, and it bombed because it was, I don't want to say martial artists are notoriously cheap, but we want the best we can get for our money. And a lot of martial artists cannot afford to attend 2 martial arts camps a weekend apart. You know, they have to have time to save up their fund money. So in any case, that's the thing you have to be aware. You need to be aware of what's going on around you in terms of other events. If you can get commercial sponsors, such as whenever we did Camp Budoshin, a couple of the local martial arts suppliers, that we would send them like a couple hundred flyers each, and this would start like 2 or 3 months ahead of time. Every order that they sent out would have a flyer for the Camp Budoshin. And they were happy to do this because we put their logo on our advertising. So they get advertising, we get advertising, and you have to find ways of scratching advertisers' backs that isn't going to cost you any money, and they get something out of it, and hopefully you do too. Okay. Paying instructors is entirely negotiable. There's no flat rate. There's no, usually what I require is they at least pay my transportation, housing, meals, and that's it. If it's some dojos simply cannot afford it, yeah, I'd like to be paid a couple $100 for the weekend. I've gotten as high as several $100s, but that was decades ago. It's usually what I say is if you make a profit after my expenses, we can do a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split. You keep 60%. I do not do this. I do not do this for the income. Because I want to go there and have a good time. So, that's something you have to consider, and you have to negotiate with instructors. For Camp Budoshin, we didn't have to pay any instructors anything. They wanted to come and teach at the camp because number one, they got to see each other, and they weren't teaching. They're only teaching a couple hours a day. There were like four to six mats going at a time. They had time to sit around and talk with people they hadn't seen for years. We bought them lunch, which was courtesy of Subway or someplace like that. And again, because we're a nonprofit, we get you get a discount. But anyway, you got to you get better at it as you do it more. It's like anything else in life. If you have a guest instructor and you're bringing them in, I think the worst situation I've had, and it wasn't bad. I mean, I ended up sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor in this guy's apartment, and that's where I said it turned out to be an okay weekend. In spite of the sleeping accommodations. And we used a wall heater for heat, but in spite of it was a decent weekend. And if you're going to do a seminar, you really need to do it. As long as if you're the guest instructor, as long as your expenses are being met, you're doing it for the enjoyment of it, for the fun of it. And if you get some money on the side, terrific. But it's not if you want to say, well, I'll be there for the weekend, it's only going to cost you 20 grand. It isn't going to happen. Okay. At least not for me. So anyway, you also have to be aware of your market. What else is there to be aware of? You want to make sure everyone signs a participant release. You want to make sure any place you go is going to require liability coverage. And if you're an AJA dojo, you've got that already. That's a no-brainer. If you're going to do a seminar, you got to have advertising. You can send a blurb to the local newspaper and TV stations and radio. They usually won't show up, but you never know. We've had them show up on rare occasion. One occasion we had some people come up from Brazil for one of our Camp Budoshins. Unfortunately, they were also involved in human trafficking at the time. So we got involved with that. That was kind of a sideshow going on. They made it into the country, but they got caught on the way out. And the who was it? I forget what federal agency. They couldn't tell us anything more. But what happened with that, just a funny story, it's that one girl who lived in, God, some Nebraska or some other state called me and said, my friend was supposed to be coming, another lady, young lady, was supposed to be coming up with this group to be in Camp Budoshin, and then we were going to get together. Have you seen her? And I said, no. And I never asked the people that were involved, from Brazil, anything about this. This is a time where you need to keep your mouth shut. And she said, well, I'm concerned that they may be involved in human trafficking. And I have no idea what happened to the girl that was missing. I still don't know that. But they did catch them all as they were trying to leave the country under a different identity, which didn't work. So that's, you sometimes run into unique situations if you're holding, large events and you have large numbers of people. And for the Camp Budoshin, at the most, we'd have like maybe 150 participants. And people, we had one instructor who consistently injured other people because they weren't aware of his style of jiu-jitsu. And he just, what he did worked. He kept spraining people's wrists and arms, shoulders and legs. We, after 2 years, we didn't invite him back anymore because we said, you need to back off because you've got a lot of people that aren't experienced in your system and you're just doing techniques almost full bore on them and they're getting hurt. And we can't, that's one of your responsibilities if you're running a seminar is to make sure that your guest instructor isn't injuring people unnecessarily. And that's also, again, where if you have a student injured and you are a guest instructor, it really is important that you've got your first aid training up to speed, and you want to be in charge of dealing with them as much as possible, because that's your credibility is on the line there. He can teach, but can he help? And I've seen, not just in martial arts, but other fields where people are great teachers, but then, how do you say, the stuff hits the fan and they become totally unglued and useless as a compliment. So again, okay. I think I wore this topic out. Darren's giving half a smile. I can tell.
Darren has a poker face. I like that.
No, I watch, how do you say, I watch people's faces because people's faces tell you a lot, even when they aren't saying anything. sometimes you make misassumptions, but you know, okay. The last topic, what time do we have going here? 9:23. Do we want to get into this last one? Discuss the importance of ukemi waza in regular practice and thoughts on how to integrate it into the curriculum. Ukemi are falling techniques, correct? Thomas?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What do you mean by integrating it into the, I mean, it's hitting me in the face here, but I just want some clarification. What do you mean by integrating it into the curriculum?
Well, so 20 years ago, every class that I did would have a dedicated time for ukemi waza, and we would work all 4 directions of falling, forward rolls. Just that was Kihon, part of Kihon. As I get older and more breakable, I find myself less motivated to do ukemi all the time, and I tend, and I'm trying to do a little self-correction here, I tend to find that I'm only emphasizing ukemi if I know there's a technique where the uke needs to be able to land safely. And I'm wondering, is that wise? And so, should we have ukemi as a part of Kihon? They're always practicing falling, etc. That way, everybody is always establishing and holding to a decent baseline in curriculum. For example, in our Shodan Dinsho, you have to demonstrate the fundamentals of ukemi, but I'm instructing a little different now, and I'm wondering thoughts on that.
Okay. We make ukemi probably one of the first. We do our warm-up exercises, stretching, yada, yada, yada. And then we'll go into ukemi. If we have new students, we'll pull them aside, and usually one of the brown belts will run them. You know, I kind of exaggerate and say, you know, I know some of the brown and black belts will touch the ceiling tiles as they do their forward rolls, but I want you new students to stay as low to the ground as possible, because gravity works, and whatever goes up will come down. And so I'll have a brown belt or maybe a black belt work with the new students for the first couple of weeks on just doing the very low forward rolls and side falls and back rolls, etc. Very, you know, just as low to the ground as they can get. Eventually, we incorporate them in. It takes maybe 3 to 4 minutes to run the whole class through. I just have them do, essentially they'll do a forward my ukemi, Ushido ukemi, and then Yoko ukemi, either side. That's it, because you can't get up nicely from a side fall. Okay. And they see the upper belts doing it, you know, going and touching the ceiling tiles. And I say, I don't want you doing this. You know, they need to be confident before they start adding some altitude to their ukemi. I disagree with doing ukemi only when there's a technique that requires it, because it's a skill. It's a physical skill you should learn in case you fall anywhere. It should be an automatic reaction. It's like someone swings at you, you block or deflect. Okay. And so I just put it there at the beginning. The only time we will quote unquote test for ukemi is on the green belt exam, because you can see as a sensei whether or not they're falling right when they're doing techniques. And so I don't think it's something that you have to constantly or every once in a while test them on. If they're not doing ukemi right, they're ultimately going to leave the class because it hurts too much. If they learn, if they learn how to roll with the throws, that helps too. The other part of it is the tori, and this is, I consider this part of the ukemi training, is I will have the tori when you're throwing a person. That's why you're wearing judo gi, is to pull up slightly on the sleeve so they can land on their side rather than their back. And uke really appreciate landing on their side versus landing on their back. I say on the street, if you want to plant them through the concrete on their back, hunky dory. But in the dojo, okay. The other reason I want them on their side is because if you're going into a submission or something like that, if they're on their side, their back is to you and they can't do anything to you. They can't hit you, they can't kick you, they can't do anything else because their back is to you. And if when you get more experienced, when you come down for a submission, one of your knees is going to be on the ground so that your thigh is, I say, if this is their back, your thigh is going to be here, so they can't turn into you anyway. So it's just a good proactive defensive new move that protects you on the ground. So all of that to me is part of the ukemi training. It's you know, uke and tori both have responsibilities. But I do keep it a separate part at the beginning of class. And
For us as well, Sensei, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were finished. I didn't mean to interrupt.
oh, that's okay.
Okay.
Interrupt.
For us, it's an absolute requirement to practice ukemi on every class. And to TJ's question, I think that and we practiced all forms, you know, from the most basic to the advanced level, and taking a kip or a high or significant fall. But throughout training, through the repetition of taking falls, some of those things kind of beat up your students. And there are methods to where you can critique their ability to roll out of a technique instead of having to take an abrupt fall, such as a kip or a higher advanced type fall in some of the techniques. And as Sensei Kirby was mentioning, the tori can dictate the ability of the uke's fall if they allow them to have a more pleasant rollout versus taking an advanced type fall, which saves the body from the constant abuse over and over and over. But the preparation in advance and the curriculum that we have, every class is working on ukemi every single time.
Thank you for that. I think what precipitates this is about 3 years ago, it was discovered I have an ascending aortic aneurysm. And so if Chris was here, I would have to say, Chris, I've been teaching what I want, not what the student wants because of my situation. So what I've started doing of late, and this is what precipitated this question to Professor Kirby, is my senior students are demonstrating, because I'm careful to demonstrate myself anymore, lest that be the last thing I ever do. And I really don't want to do that. So yeah, I appreciate so much what both of you have said. Absolutely.
Okay.
I find in our classes, it's a great way to just begin, because it gets the blood flowing, it gets a bunch of smiles and so forth. So our classes begin with 2 words and a big smile on my face: follow me. And I jump on the mat with a forward roll fall. They all come behind me. I'm like the mother duck or the father duck. They all come along. And if there's a brand new student, then we get people into the side. We guide them through so that they get a somersault or they get something, you know. And then when we hit the basic falls, like Sensei Kirby, the forward roll, the back fall, and both side falls. By that time, they're ready for announcements, and the juices are flowing and the excitement's up. So I think it's a great way to begin a class.
Yeah, the only thing I would draw caution on, and I've seen it happen twice, is some sensei will have students do ukemi over solid objects. this is a real no-no. I mean, I caught one of my assistant instructors once. He had the students outside. They were doing ukemi over a park bench, and I said, "The park bench doesn't move. If a student runs into it, you're not going to injure the." You never allude to the fact that a kid could get hurt. You always allude to the fact that the park bench could get broken or damaged. Kids and young people react to that positively. If you say to that, "Don't do that, you're going to get hurt," they want to find out, are they going to get hurt? And they'll try it. But if you say, you don't want to damage a bench, what Seki would have us do, and I've done, is you just have a student roll up into a ball sideways, and people will do my ukemi over them. And if you run into the student that's in a ball, they just fall over, and they get back up and they get back into a ball, and you knock them over again. But it's a matter of using some common sense. Early on in my jiu-jitsu career, there was a judo instructor at a nearby YMCA who had his students doing my ukemi off a ladder. And one didn't land right, landed on the base of his neck and became a quadriplegic. The result. That ended his instructor's career. But you really have to, when you're having students practice stuff, you really have to use some common sense, and you have to think your way through the most unusual of exceptions, because the last thing you want to do is to have a student injured. So anyway, any other thoughts on this, on ukemi?
Sensei, I need to bolt. I've enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody. I've got umpteen pages of notes from today's class. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, we're gonna
Good seeing you, Dave.
take care, Dave.
Thank you.
We're going to stop at this point. I have something that's come up a couple times today, so I'm going to make a topic for next time, and that's limitations on sensei as they get older. Because some of us, it's getting old is inevitable. The trick is to keep your body as young as possible for as long as possible. So that's going to be one of our topics for next time. So if anyone has another topic that they'd like to add in, just send me an email, and I'll try and get this one up probably after this weekend. I think we're going up to Barstow today, to a restaurant. Now, Barstow is about 110 miles east of us in the desert. It's a Cracker Barrel restaurant, for those of you who are familiar with Cracker Barrel. In any event, their food is usually really pretty good. The downside is it's supposed to be like 118 degrees in Barstow today. So I don't know whether that's a wise decision or not.
Well, enjoy your time.
No, we'll just fry eggs on the hood of the car. Anyway, so why don't you have a good weekend? And thank you, Jonathan and Ken, for joining us. And hope you got something out of it. And we'll have this up probably by midweek, I hope. Okay.
Thank you all.
Good.
All right.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Sensei.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.